welcome back to She Investigates, the podcast where we investigate all things weird. I'm your host, Gwen Ross, and today we're going to dive into a haunting disappearance of a young woman whose story still echoes across the waves. But first, let's catch up. Guys, I knew it was going to happen. I tried to warn you, but I am so sorry that I did not get an episode out last week. It was kind of a crazy week because my kids were on spring break, and when I have them home, they're kind of just my whole focus. So I'm very sorry. Thank you for sticking with me, and I'll try to be a little bit more consistent leading up to summer before I take a little break before summer vacation. We did have a good spring break, though. We went and saw the new Minecraft movie, which, if you've seen it, I thought it was hilarious. My expectations going into the Minecraft movie were extremely low. My kids love Minecraft, but I mean, it's not really my thing. So I didn't really have high expectations. We just went because I thought that they would love it, but I thought that it was hilarious. I mean, I've always been a Jack Black fan, but I really thought he nailed it in the Minecraft movie. So if you haven't seen it already, it's definitely a fun one to go take your kids to. It's also been kind of crazy around my house because my husband right now actually has 2 jobs. He works as the director of e-commerce for a company during the day, and then in the afternoons, he's actually a track coach at a local high school. And this is his first year coaching. He loves it, and he's such a good coach. But the schedule has just been nuts. And between that and his full-time job, and then he also is helping coach my son's football team this year, and he is working with a startup company. So I kind of feel like I've been like single parenting it up the last little bit because he's just gone all the time. And I'm so happy for him. But I don't know how you single parents do it. Like it's a lot, and it just like wears on you. So that's kind of been throwing a kink in our schedule as well. But we're going to get back in the groove of things. We're going to get back on a schedule. It's going to be good. One other thing that I wanted to talk about, and if you have little ears around, you might want to pause this for a minute until you're by yourself. But I'm just wondering, like, when did Easter baskets become so over the top? I have been gathering little things here and there for my kids for their Easter baskets, thinking that I'm doing a great job. Like I like to get them like a little game or like, something fun for outside for summer, water guns or chalk or stuff. But like, I don't ever buy them huge things for their Easter baskets. But everything that I'm seeing, like influencers that are sharing lists for ideas for Easter baskets and stuff like that are like way over the top. I even saw one girl post the other day that she's getting her son a bike for Easter. A bike. I was like, when did Easter become second Christmas? And it's going to be kind of hard to explain when my kids go back to school and are like, what did the Easter bunny bring you? Oh, he brought me some chocolates. He brought me some chalk. He brought me a bike. Like, how am I going to explain that? I don't know. But I don't know. Have you guys noticed that? Have you noticed the Easter baskets every year feel like they're just getting bigger and bigger and it's becoming like a second huge gift-giving holiday almost? Anyways, that's just my gripe for the week. Take it for what you will. And with that, let's jump into today's episode. If you have ever been on a cruise, you know that it's like the ultimate vacation. I have been on 2 cruises. The first one that I went on was with my husband on our honeymoon. And then I actually just went on a cruise last year with my sisters for a girls' trip. And it's so nice because you don't have to plan activities. You don't have to worry about food. There's something for everybody. And you can pretty much get food like at any hour. You just show up and everything's pretty much planned for you. But what happens when someone goes missing on a cruise ship? I mean, there's only so many places that they could be, right? Maybe not. This is the story of Amy Lynn Bradley. Before she became a headline, before her name was etched into internet forums and missing persons posters, Amy was just Amy. Amy Lynn Bradley was born on May 12, 1974 in Petersburg, Virginia. She had thick brown hair, a striking smile, bright green eyes, and a stubborn determination that made her unforgettable. She was very athletic. She played basketball and she swam competitively in high school. She even earned a spot on the dean's list at Longwood College, where she studied physical education and graduated just days before that fateful trip. Her mom, Iva, once said in an interview, quote, "Amy was the kind of girl who did everything right. She had plans, she had goals, she never gave us a moment's worry," end quote. Amy was also artistic. She loved to draw. In fact, she had several tattoos: a Tasmanian devil dribbling a basketball on her shoulder, a sun on her lower back, a gecko on her navel, and a Chinese symbol on her ankle. Her brother Brad described her as fiercely protective. He said, quote, "She was like a second mom sometimes. I'd get myself into dumb situations and Amy was the one pulling me out. She always had my back," end quote. And she was excited about life after college. At just 23 years old, she had just accepted a new job, moved into a new apartment, and adopted a new dog. Things were really lining up for her, and she had her whole future ahead of her. She was even preparing to go back to school to get a master's degree. So this cruise, it was a celebration. It was a reward for all of this hard work that she had done in college. In March 1998, Amy, her brother Brad, and their parents, Ron and Iva, boarded the Royal Caribbean's Rhapsody of the Seas. It was their first family vacation in years, and the tickets were actually a gift from Ron Bradley's employer. This was kind of like a last hurrah for the family before Amy and Brad kind of had to launch into adult life and responsibilities really set in. So Amy and her brother flew down separately and met her parents at the cruise port. Amy, however, kind of had reservations about the cruise. According to her parents, she was kind of hesitant about even going. She didn't like the idea about being out in the open water, and girl, same. Neither do I. There is something about the dark, deep depths of the ocean that just gives me the creeps because we have no idea what's in there. But she had a bad feeling about going on this cruise. But she went for her family. They had a close bond and they wanted to spend time together. And by all accounts, the family was enjoying themselves on the cruise. But they started to notice some unusual things about the staff. If you've ever been on a cruise, you know that they usually have what's known as a formal night. And that's where everybody dresses up nicer than usual for dinner. So the boys were dressed in tuxedos, and Amy and her mom wore fancy dresses. And Amy's mother noted that she felt like Amy was getting a lot of attention from the staff for her dress, and that the ship's crew were kind of over attentive to their table. On that same night, there were several pictures that were taken by the cruise ship photographer of Amy and her brother Brad, which were then loaded onto the cruise ship's online gallery for people to purchase. So later that night, while Amy's mother and father were having a drink, a crew member approached them and asked them, "Where is Amy?" And they asked, "Why?" And the crew member said that he wanted to take her to Carlos and Charlie's. Her mom told him that she was with her brother, and the conversation ended really quickly, but she thought it was super weird that they even knew her daughter's name. So when Amy and Brad met back up with their parents, they told Amy about the experience, noting that they thought that this place, Carlos and Charlie's, sounded like some type of bar. So they stressed to Amy and her brother not to leave the ship, that it was late, they were going to be in a foreign country, and to just kind of hang out tonight. And Amy and Brad assured their parents they weren't planning to go anywhere, but Amy seemed really kind of creeped out by the whole thing, that they knew her name, they wanted to take her somewhere. After that, the family spent the evening at the ship's nightclub dancing. And while they were at the nightclub, Amy's mom noticed that that same waiter from earlier approached Amy and was having some kind of conversation with her. After the conversation ended, he looked at the bass player from the band and gave him kind of just a little nod. And this was interesting because Amy had actually already met the bass player and had begun a friendship with him earlier in the cruise. Amy had mostly kept to herself on board. She didn't really drink heavily. She wasn't into partying, but she did enjoy dancing. And that's how she had ended up meeting some members of the ship's band, Blue Orchid. And particularly a bass player known only by his nickname, Yellow. So Ron and Iva finally decided to call it a night and headed to their room to go to bed. And Amy and Brad continued dancing at the nightclub together on the ship. And the photos from that night show Amy on the dance floor laughing and relaxed, smiling. But not long after that, the night would take on a far more sinister tone. They were both getting tired, and Brad headed back to their room at around 4 a.m., and Amy followed shortly after at around 4:15. They went out to the balcony in their room and talked for a little bit, and then Brad decided to go to bed. So they said goodnight, and they went their separate ways. Then, at about 5:15 a.m., Ron, Amy's dad, woke up, and he could see Amy sitting out on the balcony. So he laid back down, went back to sleep, but then he woke up again 20 minutes later, and Amy wasn't there. She also wasn't in her bed. So he got up, and he went out on the balcony. He could see that the ship wasn't moving, so he decided to go out and look for her. Her cigarettes and her lighter were the only things that were missing. Her shoes were there, her bed was unused, and it was like Amy had just vanished. So Ron started searching all over the ship for Amy. He started getting concerned when it had been over an hour that he had been searching, and they still had not seen any trace of her. So at about 11 a.m., he comes back to the room to get Iva, and he wakes her up just in a panic. So Ron and Iva immediately alerted the ship's staff, hoping that they would help in alerting the passengers to help look for Amy. But they were met with hesitation, delays, and deflections. Ron said in an interview with CBS, quote, "We were begging them to shut down the ship, to make an announcement. They said they didn't want to alarm the other passengers," end quote. So there was no lockdown issued. There was no urgent search. And the ship was actually getting ready to pull up to its first port in Curaçao. And the passengers were being allowed to disembark. They were told that no matter what the circumstances were, passengers must disembark the ship as scheduled. So if Amy had been taken off that ship, the window to find her had just opened and closed. As the passengers left the ship, the captain and crew offered to help the family search the ship for her. So her parents and her brother began knocking on cabin doors, just desperate to find Amy. Brad, her brother, was approached by that same band member as the night before, and he told him that he was sorry to hear about Amy. Now, this was strange because the only people that Ron and Iva had told about Amy's disappearance were the captain of the ship and the head of security. So how did this random band member even know that she was missing? That should have been red flag number 1. So they searched for hours and finally met back with the captain and crew, and they were told that everywhere on the ship had been searched, every nook and cranny, and Amy just wasn't on the ship. So the Bradleys begged for an announcement to be made, for help looking from the other passengers, but the captain refused, saying that it would, quote, disturb the other guests. They were given a few choices. They could either stay on the ship, despite it leaving Curaçao, or they could disembark and look for Amy in Curaçao. The captain finally agreed to circulate a photo of Amy on the ship, hoping that somebody might have seen her, but it didn't provide any leads. So Amy's family finally made the hard decision to get off the ship and begin searching in Curaçao for Amy. But the American embassy was actually closed, and the FBI wasn't going to be able to reach them for another 24 hours. So basically, it was up to the family to just hit the pavement running if they wanted to find Amy and not just lose a bunch of time. The ship left for its next port of call, and the family actually contacted their family back home in the United States to try to get them to do everything that they could on their end to help with the search. Iva's brother was actually able to find out that the search that was conducted on board only included bathrooms, common areas, and lockers. They didn't search any of the passengers' rooms. That is a far cry from every nook and cranny that they told them. So after finding that out, they feel a pull to get back on the boat and search the boat more. So they flew to St. Thomas, which was the next port for the ship, and demanded to be let back on the boat. Once they were back on the ship, they confronted the captain and crew, and with the help of the FBI this time, another search of the ship begins. Amy's mother was actually approached by 2 college-age girls, and they told her that they actually saw Amy the morning she disappeared getting onto an elevator with a band member. There's that band member again, red flag number 2. Now her family is starting to wonder if Amy was somehow convinced to rejoin the band member at the nightclub after returning to her room and saying goodnight to her brother. That would explain why he knew that she was missing before anybody else even knew. So Brad told the FBI about this weird conversation that he had with the bass player, and they decided to interrogate him. But of course, he claimed that Brad made it all up and that he had no idea where Amy was. Another strange occurrence had to do with those pictures that were taken by the ship's photographer earlier in the night. He remembers taking the pictures and he remembers uploading them to the ship's photo album, but they've all now disappeared and nobody knows what happened to them. All of the pictures that they took in their fancy clothes at dinner, just gone. There was also a videographer that had been hired on the ship who was not a member of the ship's crew, and he heard about Amy's disappearance and he went through all of his video footage from the night and he found footage of Amy and the band member together at the nightclub that night. The videographer actually offered the footage to a travel companion of the Bradleys, and they passed it on to the head of security to give to the FBI. The videographer was visited at his room and told that he needed to turn over the master tapes, and he refused. Good for him. A year later, the brother of the videographer contacted the Bradleys because they'd never really heard anything back about the video, and it turns out that the Bradleys didn't even know that it existed. They were able to get in contact with the videographer and get the footage. But why did it take so long to get that footage? Why had the head of security not handed it over to the FBI when he had originally gotten it from the videographer? That is super sus right there. The bass player was eventually given a polygraph test by the FBI and passed, which, as we know, means nothing because polygraph tests are notoriously not completely accurate. They can't even be used in court. So why are we still using them? But anyways, that was pretty much the end of the cruise ship line's involvement in the investigation. Royal Caribbean's theory has always been that Amy must have just fallen overboard, an accident or a misstep in the early hours of the morning. But there's problems with that theory. The first is Amy was an accomplished swimmer. She'd worked as a lifeguard, and she had no reason to even be anywhere near the railings. Not to mention, the ship's balcony was over 3 feet high and was specifically designed to prevent accidents like that from happening. Plus, nobody heard a splash. Nobody saw a struggle. Nobody heard anything. Brad remembers the strange inconsistencies in the ship's behavior. Quote, they acted like it was no big deal. They didn't treat it like a crime scene. They didn't seem interested in looking for her, end quote. So when the cruise was over, the Bradleys returned home without Amy, and they started launching their own investigation to get Amy's face out into the public. Ron and Brad actually returned to Curaçao to continue the investigation there and see if they could find any clues to Amy's whereabouts. In the months and the years that followed, disturbing sightings began to surface. The first was a local cab driver in Curaçao who claims that Amy approached his cab on the morning that she went missing and asked to use his phone. Her family is actually convinced that it was Amy that he saw, and that's based off of his description of her vibrant green eyes. If you remember, I said earlier, she just had these bright green, remarkably green eyes that you wouldn't forget. So he gave them 3 areas to look for her, and they searched those areas, but they didn't have any luck. A year after her disappearance, a Canadian businessman named David Carmichael went on a diving trip to Curaçao in August of 1998 with a friend. And they were on the beach. They were washing their equipment on the beach. There wasn't really anybody else on the beach. But then they saw a woman walking with 2 men, one on either side. The girl walked up to David before being forced away from him by the 2 men. And she kept looking up at David and his friend, almost asking them for help with her eyes. And then she would look down again. And David found that strange enough that he decided he was going to follow them. And he noticed that the woman seemed to be trying to communicate indiscreetly with him. It seemed like she was going out of her way to show her tattoos to David. When he got home, he saw a familiar face and familiar tattoos on the TV show he was watching where the Bradleys had been on to promote Amy's disappearance. He knew that it was Amy, knew her face, the tattoos were the same, and he knew that woman that he had seen on the beach that day was Amy. He tried to reach out to the FBI and explain everything. And in that same August, a private investigator named Frank Jones, who presented himself as a former military special ops officer, contacted the family. And he believed that Amy was part of this huge human trafficking ring operating in the Caribbean. He thinks that he can bring her home, but here's the problem. He needs an advance of $25,000. Her family was so desperate that they raised this money from their friends and family to give him in advance so that he would be able to run this operation to bring her home. And he headed to Curaçao, and he sends back these pictures to the family of a woman who looks a lot like Amy. It even looks like she has the same ankle tattoos. And he tells the family he's ready to launch the rescue mission. But he needs some more money. $100,000 to be exact. And this poor family, they were so desperate to get her back that they were willing to do anything. And Ron's former boss, the one who had actually bought the tickets for the cruise as a gift, offered to front the money. I think he probably felt bad that he had sent this family on the cruise that had resulted in Amy going missing. And his former boss also hires his own private investigator to kind of check up on Frank Jones and make sure that he's legit. And the private investigator that he hires is Tim Buckles. So Tim heads to the island, and the Bradleys wait for a week for news of Amy's rescue. And they finally get a call from Frank saying that there was a gunfight with her captors and he wasn't able to rescue her. Then they get a call from Tim, the other private investigator, letting them know that Frank was not who he said he was, and that he was basically just a con artist and was using their money to live it up and drink and relax on the beach. And the photos that he'd sent were totally fake. They were hired models with stenciled ankle tattoos to make them look more real. And with that, the case stalled for years. Then, in 2002, the FBI contacted the Bradleys to tell them that Amy had been spotted in Curaçao again. They said that in 1999, a U.S. Navy sailor claimed he saw Amy in a brothel in Curaçao. She approached him, said that her name was Amy, and begged for help. She tried to explain that she wasn't allowed to leave the brothel and she'd need his help to escape. But the officer just went on with his night and didn't help. And he didn't report it for years. And he said that that was because fear of repercussions from the military. Then he saw Amy's picture on the cover of a magazine and realized that was the girl that he had seen in the brothel. So he contacted the FBI and they returned to the scene, but they're just too late. The building where that brothel was being held had burned down by then. In 2005, Amy's parents received an anonymous email with photos of a woman on a sex trafficking website posing in lingerie. The website was offering an escort service, and there's a woman that's posted not under the name Amy, but under the name Jazz. And she bore a chilling resemblance to Amy. The investigator tasked with comparing photos of Jazz with Amy would later say that he was so sure that the woman in the photos was Amy that he would bet his whole career on it. The woman's tattoos, even her piercings matched. Iva said, quote, "When I saw that photo, I knew in my heart that was her. That was my daughter," end quote. Then a Canadian woman visiting a bathroom in a Curaçao shopping mall claimed that she encountered a distressed young woman who said, quote, "My name is Amy. I'm from Virginia," end quote. After exiting the bathroom, she found two men standing outside the bathroom as if waiting for Amy. So the woman starts searching for security in the store, but while she was searching, Amy exited the bathroom and left the store with the two men through a back exit. When she returned home from her vacation, she sees pictures of Amy and also contacts the FBI immediately. A new composite drawing of Amy is done and her captors, but no new leads were discovered. It feels like she's just like this ghost in the wind that everybody is just like barely missing. And these sightings all kind of gave rise to the same terrifying theory, and that's that Amy Lynn Bradley had been kidnapped and trafficked. Cruise ships, especially in the 90s, were notoriously unregulated. They operated under loose laws with little oversight and even less accountability. Royal Caribbean would later be accused of mishandling multiple disappearances. And Amy's family believed that the company wasn't just negligent, but that they were actually covering something up. What about Yellow, the bass player from the band? According to investigators, he was seen dancing intimately with Amy that final night. And after her disappearance, he reportedly lied about how long they were together. When questioned further, he was gone, fired, disappeared from the ship's manifest. And I kind of agree with that it seems like they're trying to cover something up because he gets fired, the pictures are mysteriously disappeared off of the cruise ship's gallery. It just seems a little too convenient to me. Ron and Iva Bradley have never stopped fighting. They actually appeared on America's Most Wanted, Dr. Phil, Oprah, and multiple media outlets. They hired private investigators. They basically spent their savings chasing leads. Ron said, "You never think that this will happen to your family, but once it does, you can't stop. You don't stop." They have created a website, posted rewards, and even followed up on leads in person, but every single trail that they've tried to follow has gone cold. And that pain is just always fresh. Iva said, "You don't ever learn to live without your child. You just learn to live through it." So what really happened to Amy? Did she fall overboard? Was she lured off the ship by somebody she trusted? Was she abducted, sold, silenced? To this day, we still don't know. But what we do know is this. Cruise ships are still a legal gray area, and disappearances happen often. Too many families still wait for answers. Amy would actually be 50 years old today, but her case remains open with the FBI, and there's still a $250,000 reward for credible information. If you know anything about the disappearance of Amy Lynn Bradley, please come forward, because someone out there knows what happened. And Amy, if by some miracle you're out there listening, we haven't stopped searching for you, and we never will. It's kind of interesting because while I was typing out this episode, I actually got an email ping in my inbox from Royal Caribbean inviting me to come take a cruise with them. And it kind of made me second guess wanting to get on another cruise ship. Like I mentioned in the episode, international waters have international laws. So as soon as you leave the port, you're no longer under United States laws or whatever country you're leaving from. You're under international laws now, and they're a lot harder to enforce and a lot more vague. So that's why it seems like it's a lot easier to get away with things when they happen on cruise ships. I got the majority of my information for this episode from a show that's called Cruise Ship Killers. And you guys, there is 40 episodes. 40. You can watch it on Peacock if you need a little something to tide you over until next week's episode. But 40 episodes of this show of incidents like this happening where people disappeared or were found dead on cruise ships. I don't know about you, but that really has me second guessing any cruise in the near future for me. So I'm interested to know what you guys think. As for me, in my opinion, I am kind of leaning towards the trafficking theory. I think that maybe the members of the cruise ship staff were tied up in this trafficking ring somehow in Curaçao and would take girls from cruise ships. And if that's the case, I would say that it's very possible that Amy may still be alive and that her parents may eventually still be able to be reunited with them, although things will never be the same. Obviously, everyone has been changed in that family from this situation, but I hope for their sake that is in their future in some way, shape, or form, that the family will be able to get closure and be able to move on with their lives. And that is the end of today's episode. So let me know what you think on my Instagram post for this episode, what theory you're leaning towards, and thank you so much for listening. I will be back next week with an all-new episode, and until then, I will keep snooping so you don't have to. This is She Investigates, signing off.